Okay, this is a video response to Jacqueline Hadley. She's actually a friend of mine here on YouTube, and I've subscribed to her. She has a lot of great things to say, and I'm going to direct this directly to you, Jacqueline. I respect you on a lot of areas of your thought. I think we can unify on a political front for freedom of speech and against social justice warriors and Islam. But I would like to deal with this video you did about Jesus and understanding Jesus, and a lot of issues I have with it. Now, I'll let you know, I did my master's thesis on the historical Jesus, and I did my PhD dissertation on early Christianity, dealing with Islamic apologetics against early Christianity. And I've studied the subject pretty well. Here's my dissertation right here. So I've studied this a lot with regards to early Christianity. Here's the Greek New Testament. I'm a little rusty on it, but I can parse out the Greek words or the Greek sentences and all that stuff. So I've studied a lot of this that you're going to deal with here on this video. And so let's deal with your beginning statement here. And I want you to know that I respect you as a person, but I'm going to deal with these, and I hope you take this in a spirit of respect. But I think you say some things that are very off here that I would like to deal with.
My name is Jacqueline Hadley, and today I want to talk to you about how you can understand Jesus. Years ago, I read a saying which stated, just because something is popular doesn't mean it's right, and just because something is right doesn't mean it's popular. This is very true, in fact, for Christianity. For you see, Christianity as a religion grew in predominance and number due to the forced conversions under Roman Emperor Constantine's rule.
Time out. Okay, Jacqueline, right there, you're telling me something that I am sorry to say shows that you haven't studied this very much, church history. What you've done is taken popular opinion about what happened during Constantine and what floats around there on the internet, but it actually didn't occur. Constantine did not force anybody to convert. What he did was do the edict, what's called the Edict of Milan, which is a edict of toleration towards Christians so that they could worship freely without persecution. They've been persecuted under Diocletian. Now, later on down the road in 390, you have Theodosius, who does impose Christianity upon all the entire Roman Empire, and that happens later down. But when you say Constantine forced people to convert, that's not correct. Christianity actually was very popular in the empire, both east and west, and it was gaining prominence. And Constantine converted, of course, because of his famous vision that he saw, and he made his edict to tolerate Christians, to give them freedom of religion, freedom of expression, so they could, kind of like what we have in the United States, and the pagans could continue to worship how they wanted to worship, and the Jews could continue to worship how they wanted to worship. So when you say that, I'm going, this is not, this hasn't been, you haven't researched this very deeply at all. You've taken popular things and run with it.
When we look back at history from any historian or scholar, we see that there is no historical evidence that a man named Jesus or Yeshua even existed.
Okay. Right here, Jacqueline, this statement right here, and with other atheists make this statement, it makes me seriously question your deconversion. It really does. Because when you say this, you are taking a position that is so extreme that almost no scholar or historian that specializes in the subject of early Christianity, historical Jesus, or anything like that would take. Almost none. You are taking basically a flat earth position. Or a young earth creationist position. Actually, it's even worse than young earth creationism. Okay? Because there's thousands of scholars in the SBL. Almost none hold this position that there's no historical evidence that Jesus existed. None. So I hear about, I'd say 70 to 80% of atheists that either hold this position or think it's legit. And again, it makes me really question when the atheists say, "Oh, I was led by the evidence to leave Christianity." When statements are made like this, I go, I've studied the subject a lot, okay, and it's just so. I'm trying to be polite, okay. It's just so fringe view. That's a nice way to put it, to say that there's no historical evidence that Jesus existed. There is a massive amount of historical evidence that Jesus existed, okay, and that we can say a lot of things about him using the historical method to about his life and his ministry and everything that happened. Okay, some very core things that occurred there. And let's move on here with what you're going to say.
The Romans were meticulous record keepers, and yet the crucifixion of Jesus is not even listed. It is
Okay, I want to know what Roman historian you would expect. Tacitus mentions him. Suetonius mentions him. Josephus mentions him. Now you're going to say, well, that's, a later Christian gloss and later Christian interpolation. Now scholars do concede there is a later Christian interpolation, but there is a core to even Josephus that he stated. You could see it very clearly. You could see the later Christian scribe correcting him, correcting Josephus. Okay, read John Dominic Crossan, who's no friend of Bible-believing Christians, about Josephus. All right, so, but what we do have is Christian sources themselves. You're going to say, well, we can't use the Bible to confirm Jesus existed because it's biased. Every ancient historian was biased. You don't think so? Suetonius was biased, or Josephus, or Tacitus? You don't think that these Roman and Jewish historians were biased? If you're going to go that direction, we've got to get rid of almost all of ancient history. Even today, no historians are unbiased. And if there's a historian that says they're unbiased, then you know that they're not even aware of their own biases. So there's an issue there of you say meticulous history. Who was the Roman historian that was assigned to chronicle Jewish messianic movements in the Galilee and Judea in the late 20s? Can you name me a Roman historian who was supposed to chronicle that? Anyway, let's keep going.
For Christians to believe that this was done in order to cover up the evidence of the one true God.
Who says that? That the Roman history? I mean, your premise is actually off there. There is a massive amount of evidence to show Jesus existed. We could say a lot of things about him with historical certainty, but Christian apologists say that this is to cover it up. What Christians say that? I don't know, but maybe friends you're talking to, I'm not sure. Let's move on.
Let's look at this a little further. There is historical evidence for Pontius Pilate, Caesar, King Herod, but the funny thing is, the way that these people actually did act with their character and historical events is completely different than how the Bible depicts them.
That's not correct, actually. King Herod was a vicious ruler, murdering his own family members. Caesar Augustus did take a census of the Roman Empire. The dates are different. There's some disputes about the dates on that. And Pontius Pilate, he was vicious in many ways, but when you read the Gospels, what you find is he's kind of this indifferent, kind of cowardly guy who doesn't want to really take responsibility for the death of Jesus, so he won't get it pinned on himself. He wants the Jews to be the ones to get it pinned. Hey, this is a Jew. I'm going to have him crucified, but you guys are the ones who want him to be crucified. So, and he also puts up above Jesus' head, this is Jesus of Nazareth, who is King of the Jews. What that is saying, Jacqueline, to Jews, don't rebel, or this is your fate. That's exactly what Pontius Pilate was doing when he put up that Roman sign above Jesus' head. Let's move on here.
King Herod never slaughtered all of those children. Everything the Bible claims about those people is completely contrary to their real personality, character, and historical events. Now, I want you to think about something else. Let's look at something that Bart Ehrman, who is a New Testament scholar of religious studies, has said. He has explained that the Gospels of Jesus were written decades after his alleged death. around 60 AD. The epistle letters of the Apostle Paul were written around 20 AD.
Okay, I think what you mean there, it's not 20 AD, okay? The ministry of Jesus would have been in the latter half of the 20s. So obviously, what I think you mean there is he was writing 20 years after Jesus. What we know is that Paul, the earliest letter we have of Paul is 1 Thessalonians, written around 51 AD, which would be 20 years after Jesus would have been crucified, about 30 AD. Okay, so that's what you mean. Now, Mark was written in the 60s. Luke and Matthew in the 80s, and John in the 90s. Now, decades is nothing in ancient history. It's nothing, Jacqueline. Suetonius, a lot of Roman historians are writing decades, even a century after the events they're chronicling. So is that, we just throw them out the window now? Mark would have been in touch with eyewitnesses, as would have been Luke, who when the wee sections of Acts states he was in the Holy Land in the 50s to contact the people that he talked to, the eyewitnesses and ministers of the word in Luke chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. Okay? John states he was in contact with eyewitnesses, and Matthew was written in the 80s, and he has access to a lot of traditions coming from very early as well. And he's also using Mark and Q, which the dating of Q goes a lot earlier because it's in Matthew and Luke. So obviously it goes much earlier. Many scholars date it to the 40s, maybe even the 30s. It's a sayings tradition that was probably coalesced by the Jerusalem apostles in Judea, okay, by the 12 and those who were the ones that were holding the traditions, the ones that remembered the traditions from John the Baptist to the death and resurrection of Jesus.
Now, if you think about this for a second, doesn't it seem to you that the Apostle Paul is the one who created Christianity in the first place?
No, it doesn't. The Apostle Paul was persecuting Christians, and he came into the church after his visionary experience there on the road to Damascus, with the Christians very suspicious of him, right? Imagine a Muslim convert like Osama bin Laden converting to becoming a Western. Wouldn't we be suspicious of him at first because he's trying to kill us and all this? So he would have been seen very suspicious. When Paul tried to get the Jewish Christians, to allow Gentiles to be recognized as Christians without being circumcised and obey the law of Moses, there was a huge fight in the church. Anything Paul tried to suggest would have been met with a lot of woe. They're suspicious of him in this. But according to Galatians and Acts, Peter, James, and John, and the leaders in Jerusalem did recognize Paul as a legitimate leader with Barnabas as well as legitimate leaders to go out to the Gentiles while they would go to the Jews. Okay? So Christianity was not made up by that. By the way, the traditions in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15 were traditions that Paul had received about Jesus' Last Supper, his Last Supper in 1 Corinthians 11, and the tradition he received in 1 Corinthians 15 about Jesus' death and resurrection and appearances. Okay, so these are traditions he'd received from those Jerusalem apostles, okay, that were before him. And also in 1 Corinthians 7, you have traditions that Paul's citing about the teachings of Christ about marriage. And I think you even deal with that in one of your other videos. But let's stop here and we'll make another video. But I want you to think about that if you don't watch the other video or anything, but I would recommend it. But when you're saying this, you're saying the evidence, and in other videos you say the evidence led you away from Christianity after the evidence led you. When you make videos like this and you make statements that there's no historical evidence that Jesus existed, it makes me really question if you were led away from Christianity by the evidence, because that to me is a very absurdly fringe view to take. And you're going to cite Sam Harris as some authority on early Christianity or historical Jesus scholarship, which Sam Harris would not have. Again, it's like quoting somebody way out of their field in an area that they know very little about. It's like quoting Richard Dawkins when it comes to philosophy. Richard Dawkins is a great zoologist. When it comes to philosophy, he is undergrad level. at best, I would say, undergrad when it comes to philosophy. You talk to other atheistic philosophers, and they are embarrassed by the arguments Richard Dawkins made. That's how a lot of, I'm certain, Bart Ehrman would, who's an agnostic New Testament scholar, Gert Lüdemann, and Will, who's an atheist New Testament scholar, would look at Sam Harris as some kind of joke if making statements about the New Testament. So anyway, we'll deal with it in the next video.